afternoon, and welcome to the Voice of Wisdom. With over 60 years of experience as an investment banker, entrepreneur, investment analyst, economist, and venture capitalist, Morty Davis is Wall Street and capitalism personified. The over 400 companies for which he has raised more than $3 billion over the years have created a countless number of jobs and exciting new products. Through The Voice of Wisdom, Mr. Davis explores, analyzes, and debates the most topical, political, economic, and social issues facing our world today. Joining Mr. Davis today for a discussion on the debt ceiling compromise is Len Carter. Len is an experienced investment banker, business consultant, and private investor. And now, Mr. Davis and Mr. Carter.
Welcome back. It's great to be with you again, my partners in presenting the world with wisdom. This is Morty Davis, the voice of wisdom, and I have to tell you, so often I'm so impressed with all my listeners, well, not all, but 98% of them that get in touch with me, and they give me more wisdom than I ever knew I needed. So thank you for being a participant, and keep on calling and bringing me your wisdom. Tonight we have a very special guest, Mr. Carter, Len Carter, a brilliant mind and one of the top intellectuals, and someone who's really knowledgeable about the subject we're talking about. If you haven't seen it on your announcement that we sent out today, it's a compromise reached between President Biden and House Leader Kevin McCarthy, a fair budget deal or a ransom payment for a debt ceiling extension. Well, and tonight we're going to find out if it'll pass, because on both sides, on the extremes at both sides say they're totally against it. There was a bad deal, what shouldn't have happened. The most interesting part I found was I watched Donald Trump. He's always so entertaining, if not always totally truthful, because during his presidency, 4 years, 3 times the ceiling, the spending ceiling was raised, or the borrowing ceiling was raised. And when it came up each time, he said, "This is sacred. We can't play around with this. It's sacred." And now he's preaching that don't give in to the Democrats, don't give in to Biden. Let's let it pass, even if we go into total
default.
It's his fault, my fault, it's the fault.
It works for casinos, why wouldn't it work for the country?
Yeah, he always borrowed tons of money and let the casinos go into bankruptcy. And then he said, he never had a problem putting everything. He had an airline that flew from New York to Boston and New York to Washington, a shuttle, and that went into bankruptcy. Almost everything he ever touched went into bankruptcy. That's the way he made tons of money, because he never had to pay back in full what he borrowed. So he said it was very sacred during those 4 years. Now it's become, what's the opposite word of sacred? I can't even think of it. It's not necessary. It's what?
Disposable.
Yeah. It doesn't matter, he says.
Inconsequential.
Yeah, inconsequential. Let the United States not pay its bills. It's more psychological. He's got a whole explanation of why it's okay to leave it now, when 4 years ago, or was that his tenure as president ended in 20, so it's only 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago. So 3 years ago, up to 3 years ago, was sacred. Now it's become disposable, or it just doesn't matter. It matters. He's preaching that we should let it go into default, because that would hurt he feels it would hurt the Democrats, it would hurt Biden. He doesn't think about all the people it would hurt, the veterans, the people that couldn't get paid Social Security. I mean, I can't even list all the negative consequences. There would be a major economic crash, financial crash, the stock market would crash. Even the last time they didn't raise it, or they threatened, the government threatened not to raise it. The rating agency, one of the rating agencies, I think it was Moody's, lowered the evaluation from AAA to AA, and the stock market went down trillions of dollars.
I think this time Fitch is threatening or putting the U.S. on credit watch, or credit down, or credit potential downgrade this time. So
Fitch being a rating agent,
yeah,
one
the
of the
third
three
rating
rating
agent, yeah.
agents.
So hasn't happened yet, but it still could happen even if they sign the bill, because it's just their expectation and anticipation of what could happen.
The second item on tonight's podcast, on the debt ceiling compromise, the question is, how significant is it that the compromise effectively resolves the issue through the 2024 election? In other words, both sides reached a compromise, and they won't let that happen again. This happen again. Bring it to the edge. They won't put a ceiling on it for the next 2 years, till after the next election. So that's the good news.
Or the bad news for the next president.
Well,
because the next time it's going to hit the fan is going to be in 2025, early 2025, which is going to be right when the new president is inaugurated. So that's his incoming welcome gift, his or her incoming welcome gift.
the question is also, will the Democrats or the Republicans benefit more in the next upcoming presidential election from this debt ceiling crisis and its resolution so close to the deadline? Because it was a kind of blackmail, or I don't know what you call it, hostage holding, because the Republicans said, if you don't give us what we want, some things that are important to us, even though the money was due and we had to pay it because it was money spent. We weren't talking about a budget that was something that was going to happen in the future. The money was already spent. It's a lot like if I took out my American Express card and spent all of the money I wanted, and then when it was due at the end of the month, I told American Express, I'm not paying you. And that's what it would have been, maybe a lot worse, because if I did it, it would only affect me. If the government did it, it would affect veterans, it would affect Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, and just about every aspect of our lives. Aid to dependent children, food stamps, just an endless amount of issues. So let me stop monopolizing this and have my impressive guest, my very knowledgeable and brilliant guest, Mr. Carter, join me in this discussion.
So, well, let's start with the big question. You know, it goes to the House tonight. Is it going to pass the House? All indications are yes.
It looks like it's going to pass because it's bipartisan. So even though there are a lot of Republicans at one end, very conservative, or even some people might say extremist or crazy, that say they're not going to, they want to follow what Trump said, let it go into default. And there were a lot of Democrats that said, why did you give in to, when Biden said he was not going to give in to this kind of blackmail, to this kind of being held hostage. So and Biden's approach was what he promised before to get elected, that he would try to, and that's been his history, try to compromise. So he keeps saying, that's what government is, and that's what a compromise is. You don't get everything you want, but we did very well, and we avoided the disaster.
You have a good compromise when both sides are unhappy. That's what judges always say. I know I made the right decision when both parties are not happy.
Right.
But, I mean, It
doesn't work with my wife, though. When we make a compromise, both of us are unhappy. I pay the price, she pays the price.
In order for it not to pass the House, you'd need roughly half the Democrats to not support it, and half the Republicans not support it. So,
or the other way around.
Well, you need both for it not to pass. But what would have to happen?
You need the same thing.
At least half of each side, say. So, and that, given there are a few on each side who are quite vocal, the reality is, I think that you're not going to, that would be like 100 Republicans and 100 Democrats saying no. I don't think we're close to. I think in this case, the media, I think, is dramatizing that. The bigger question is the Senate, I guess, but even there is the same issue. You'd have to have 25 senators and 25 Democrats abandon the bill, which isn't going to happen. Although I was just reading Bernie Sanders is saying no, he's not voting for it.
He's not voting.
He says, in good conscience, I can't do it. So he's one of the progressives who are not doing it. I know Lindsey Graham was making noise about not being a supporter. I'm not sure what he's finally decided, but it looks like...
There are a number of Republicans that have said they're definitely not going to support it, even though Kevin McCarthy, who's the Speaker of the House, has seemingly put his whole career on the line by compromising. When he got the Speaker of the House appointment, he made a deal with the people who voted him in, and it took about 8 different votes to get him in, that if one person brings up that he should be eliminated as Speaker of the House, then they'll have to put it up for a vote, and he could very well lose the Speaker of the House. And he's been, not only desperate to keep it, but like his whole life is riding on his being the Speaker of the House. So, to his credit, he did compromise and bring back something that the Democrats, or at least Biden, could accept, and some of the leading Democrats did.
I don't think there's been one trigger Republican to come out to say, I want a recount of McCarthy's Speaker.
Not yet.
Yeah, not even one. And there's a lot of vocal Republicans, but I think at the end of the day, they make a lot of noise, but you don't really...
No, not yet. It ain't over. Some of them feel maybe it won't get it voted in, so they don't have to do it at this juncture. And some of them are that, stubborn and And really, a lot like Trump, there's no compromise, there's no giving in, and they will try to do what they threaten to do. So you can't say it's already been successful because they haven't done anything.
Well, I would have thought that if there was someone who was planning to make that, put up his hand or her hand and want that trigger vote, that they would have, for the sake of media attention, because if no one's has their hand up saying, I'm going to vote McCarthy out or I'm going to cause that vote to happen, if someone did do that, that's a great, opportunity for media attention, because everyone would go right toward you, and no one's done it. So, I'm betting no, that's not going to happen.
Look, I was, as I thought about it early on, upset and angry that they would use this threat that has such immense consequences, not only for the United States, for the world, for the American currency. I mean, the predictions of how bad it would be, I can't even describe it in full detail. And so I thought it was not only unreasonable but preposterous for the Republicans to say, if you don't give us what we want, it's like a little kid fainting. When I was a little kid, if my mother didn't give me something that I wanted, I'd go into hysteric. Yeah, and I'd faint. I wiped out a whole set of dishes that she loved, because every time I wanted the dish, she said no. And then I went into, she thought I'm dead, tantrum. My breathing stopped. So she gave me the dish, and ultimately the dishes all broke. So in this case, they didn't have any dishes to break, but they broke what I thought was good behavior and reasonable behavior, because that's not the United States and only one other advanced country has this kind of ceiling. The only other country in the world that has it, and it doesn't seem to ever come up to put the country at risk, because they're not as, there's sort of a much more halcyon, peaceful political group as Denmark. But I think the answer to this is, when the Democrats get in, and maybe even the Republicans, I don't know how they feel, but the next time a majority can do it, they should get rid of this ceiling. And at the end of the day, I'm very unhappy that the one thing that remains holy, that would not change and can even be increased, is defense spending, which is the biggest single item. It says something about our values and I guess what the fears that we subject our population, our people to, by saying, oh, we got to have defense spending because we could lose our country, which is ridiculous. We've never been even attacked once on our land in the whole history of the country since the Revolutionary War, when England came in and started a war to prevent us from becoming independent. But in the modern era, even during the Second World War or any war since then, we've never been attacked. So this kind of defense spending, the one person, incidentally, the one brilliant individual, at the time I wasn't so impressed with him because he was a former general and popular, so he was elected president, and that was Dwight D. Eisenhower. And during his administration, there was no wars or nothing dramatic that makes a president a real hero. the heroes are the ones that come during some major catastrophe and then help resolve it, like FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who helped overcome the Depression and helped during the Second World War. So he was one of the real heroes and changed the voting pattern of the country. So many people became Democrats because of that. Another person that changed it dramatically was Ronald Reagan, who ended the Cold War because he would this pending conflict between the United States and Russia that was overhanging our country for years finally was brought to an end. But other than that, when nothing happens or little happens of dramatic nature during the 8 years, Eisenhower wasn't that kind of, didn't get that kind of reputation, great reputation of being a fabulous president because he didn't resolve something that was prevalent during his, something negative that was prevalent during his tenure. But the one thing he did, he was the greatest general in the history of this country. He was a major general that helped the United States and England win the Second World War. And at the end of his tenure, I mentioned this before during other discussions on this podcast, at the end of the war, where every other president, to my knowledge, always summarizes his years as president, saying, all the great things that he accomplished, all the new regulations that he passed or eliminated, everything that he thinks enhances his tenure as president. Dwight Eisenhower felt it was urgent, and coming from him it was really incisive, that he warned the country against the military-industrial complex. He said, be careful, they're very powerful. Industry loves it because they get a lot of business. Every state loves it because they get contracts. Every senator and congressman loves it because they bring back contracts and subcontracts to all 50 states. So, and they never vote against defense spending. It's a big benefit to them. So, and the military, of course, loves it because the only time you get a lot of promotions to generals and admirals is during heightened military activity, during wars. So he said the two of them, the military and the industrial, getting together are a dangerous, and it's turned out to be, we spend fortunes.
Almost $1 trillion.
Yeah, and that's the one thing they wouldn't cut. They'd cut aid to dependent children. They cut aid to mothers. They cut something that was very important that they only recently raised dramatically was additional funds for the Internal Revenue Bureau to do more audits, to catch more people that don't, particularly the top 1% or 10%, that is total, and corporations that escape paying taxes because they're so good at it and they never get audited, and it's they didn't have the personnel. It's interesting that the statistics are that more African Americans get audited than the top 1% or the top 10% do, and if the African Americans get audited, even if they're found avoiding some taxes or evading taxes, they're not going to get a big chunk of money from those people generally. But if they found a 1%er, somebody in the top 1% or somebody in the top 10% was evading taxes, and they did an audit, they'd get tons of money. It would help balance the budget. And this whole discussion, the Democrats said the way to deal with the deficit, because that's really what it was all about, the deficit and the growing debt that the United States has. The one way to resolve it is to raise taxes. And the Republicans said that was that couldn't be considered. As a matter of fact, one of the major reasons for the deficit, the biggest increase during any administration in the history of the United States was during Trump's administration. It was almost $8 trillion. So the best place to get money to reduce your deficit and your debt is to raise taxes, but that was off the table. But initially they were talking about putting Social Security on the table, Medicare, everything that the lowest classes or the most needy depend on, those were on it. So it reflects the values that we have. But they did cut $10 billion a year, $20 billion over 2 years from the IRS. So a lot less people in the upper echelons that make tons of money and that assess it. And even if they audit them, look at Trump's, when they got a hold of his tax returns, it was so enormous and so convoluted. It was hundreds of pages. So these guys at the IRS are not so adept and trained to deal with those kind of things. So even when they audit them, they don't seem to be very successful, or they don't like to even address it because it's so difficult to deal with.
I think if the goal is to reduce defense spending, given the fact that is such a difficult issue to deal with directly, I think the way to do that is by lowering defense spending in real terms but not nominal terms. So in fact, if you look at the numbers, it's sort of what they actually did here, because spending on defense is targeted to go from $886 billion to $895 billion. So the Republicans can go back to their constituencies and say, we got an increase in defense spending. Right. That's what everyone wants.
Right.
But the Democrats can go back and say, oh, in real terms, 886 to 895 may actually be a reduction in real terms. So it's like, what happens with debt, with lenders in an inflationary environment, and like our national debt, inflation erodes it over time.
Right.
So you get yourself out of, a debt hole through inflation. So here, if and this may have been a strategy, let's let them increase nominally defense spending, but if you can keep it on a nominal increase, not so much, but increase, then it looks good. But then over time, as the budget grows and the economy grows, you're actually lowering defense spending.
Len, that sounds very logical and sounds like a kind of victory for the Democrats. But when you start out with such a large number that in the first place shouldn't be there, then it's important to...
That's true, but I'm talking realistically,
But it's unrealistic. It's
Clinton
what are we
that's
spending?
true, but...
What defense are we spending all this money for? All we're doing is entering more wars. They say it avoids war. No other nation has been in more wars than the United States, major wars, since the end of the Second World War, than the United States. And they say, well, we have a big defense budget so people will avoid getting involved in
this polarized, partisan world we live in.
Yeah.
I think that's idealistic to say we should. I mean, we should, but I don't think realistically How do you cut defense spending?
I
think the only way to do it is to cut it in real terms by limiting the nominal increase.
No, I think
But I mean, how do who was the last president to do that? Maybe Clinton, and that was
I told you it's almost impossible to do.
Right. So
how could you vote against defense?
that's the point.
There's no
it's
offense
idealistic to think you're going to do it.
But there's so much waste.
Of course.
There's an F-35 plane that all the military says is outdated. We don't need it. But because it provides so many jobs and it's such a great image, like one of the biggest things that you could have as a president is large parades. Even Putin, you bring out your military, that's the most impressive thing.
Yep.
And so every president does it, and what I found heartbreaking and indicative related to this issue is on Memorial Day, only 3 days ago, I think it's about 3 days ago, Monday, I saw President Biden at the National Cemetery, I forget what it's called.
It's in National Cemetery?
Yeah. Well, all the unknown soldiers are buried. They don't even know who their family is or anything. But they pay tribute to this, and all you see is rows and rows and rows, thousands of concrete monuments, and they're paying tribute to them. Oh my God, these were our heroes. I was crying because these were young men, young women that had a life. They're not heroes. The one thing Trump said. They're not heroes. They're because they volunteered to be killed.
Right. My heroes don't get captured.
Yeah, like
McCain.
McCain spent 5 years in jail in Vietnam, and has been looked on, and it has an arm that doesn't work even. It was wounded badly, and has always been considered the biggest hero in the Senate and in all of the political world. And Trump said, well, he's not my hero because he got caught and went to jail. But I'm saying, they're heroes because they gave their lives, but for the families that lost a child, they'd rather not have heroes. All they got to show for it is a gold star or something, And we got to get over this thing. The defense spending, as I keep repeating and repeating, as often as I can, the defense we should spend money on is defense against cancer, against heart disease, against Alzheimer's, against diabetes, against all the things that are going to kill. Right now, just yesterday, they announced that Jimmy Carter's wife, what's her name? Rosalind.
Has dementia.
Rosalind has Alzheimer's.
Oh, it's Alzheimer's?
Alzheimer's, yeah. But nobody's immune. The president, his wife, his children, none of the congressmen, none of the senators. George W. Bush, the father, lost a 4-year-old daughter to cancer. That's what we should defend against. That's what we should spend that kind of money on. Not on arms that kill other people, and we learn to kill better and more efficiently, larger numbers. People that don't even hate themselves. They're drafted to go fight, and they might be best friends with the guy on the other side that they're shooting at, but they learn we train them to hate the other side. It's so heartbreaking. And you say it's idealistic. That's why we should be a little more idealistic.
Of course, but not everyone is. So
well, we should, if we're going to be. Our forefathers.
So what's the next best thing?
Our forefathers asked us to be. They said,
right, but no one's abiding by that.
Yeah, but we got to have the masses, the voters, because very few voters are really involved or aware. I love these programs where they interview people on the street, even college students sometimes. They ask them, who's the vice president? And they come up with the most ridiculous answer, like some movie star or some great rock star or something. And then they'll ask, and they'll give them the names of, say, the president or the vice president. They'll say, who is Kamala Harris, who happens to be the vice president currently? And they'll say, oh yeah, she's, isn't that the one who killed her father and mother or something? Isn't that, I mean, they come up with the most. So if civics is not a major educational win for this country, very few, even what we're talking about, very few Americans are aware of this. It's, you're down in the weeds and the nitty-gritty. They're not interested in this. That's why we don't have they said, well, we passed gun control. The gun control they passed was some gun control that the NRA, National Rifle Association, is delighted that they passed it because they passed gun control. That's enough already. Because the gun control that they passed is we got to do more mental health. Because that's the mental health. As if this country has more mental health problems than all the other countries in the world. We know the answer because every other country has figured out the answer. None of them have this. Just today, there was an announcement that in one state, they brought up at their legislature that they're going to pay for half the cost of assault weapons so that they can be more available to the people that want them.
It's a good subsidy.
I'm just wondering what's the purpose? But they want to show how important it is to have guns in society, so we can kill it more and more.
I just think we can take a lesson from Mrs. Goldberg. What did Mrs. Goldberg tell Mr. Goldberg?
Yeah.
When he was about to leave?
Yeah. A voyage of 1,000 miles. Even a voyage of 1,000 miles has to start with the first step.
Yep.
So the first step, and she hasn't seen him since.
So the first step is incremental. It's limit the nominal increase. All right, it would be great if we could cut, but it's a first step.
I can't buy it.
Is it better than nothing? Is it better than a bigger increase? Yes.
Of course, that's
so. That's what the first step is. There's 1,000 more steps, Mr. Goldberg.
Ask you, would you choose between cancer and Alzheimer's or something? You have to start by dealing with the big issue that the major part of our budget. Major part of our budget is military spending and our major export to the rest of the world that allows and encourages all the fighting by other countries.
But you're dealing with at least 200 and something people in the Congress who just don't believe that.
Well, it's an educational problem. We don't educate people. Very few people are annoyed by how much we spend on defense spending. And not only that, by spending that much, it raises our interest rates. So it hurts doubly because if the interest rates go up, the deficit goes up and the debt goes up. So it's compounded. It's just unbelievable how we've gone, and it threatens our very democracy. It really does.
So what was the strategy? I mean, to set the suspension of the ceiling for 2 years, that's a very interesting number because it does come out just after the election, the next presidential election. So each side must have thought that it was good for them, that it helps their side in the election. The Republicans must have thought, we don't have to be the ones responsible for a calamity. And the Democrats must have thought, well, we don't have to deal with this now and be accused of cutting programs. So
I just want to point out to you that both sides are always happy to kick the can down somewhere in the future.
Down the road.
Down the road. Kick the can down.
But why not 3 years?
No,
Why
what I'm
2?
saying,
Why is it around the election?
well, because that's easier to get past. They like, some of these people love the idea that you're putting something that can serve as a hostage holding, so they don't want to do it for a long time. The Democrats were in power, had the president in both houses of Congress, and they could have eliminated this. It's not in the Constitution. There's no ceiling, but for some reason they chose not to do it. I don't know why. But kicking the can down the road avoids facing critical issues. At least you took care of it for today, and it's not going to affect your election if you're in the House of Representatives where you've got to run every 2 years. Let the next generation...
And they won enough, each side won enough that they could have some bragging rights.
Yeah,
Republicans could say we got some cuts, Democrats could say certain programs were like Medicaid, Medicare isn't, Social Security is left untouched, so they each can claim victory.
No, that's
why it worked. That's why they have a deal.
That's what Biden is spending all his time on the phone to convince his Democratic Party members that are against it. He says, we want a big, compromise always means you give up, you don't get everything you want. But the most important things that we wanted to say that they were talking about, that we wanted to defend and protect, was Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, all of the things that the Republicans, sadly, it's so depressing that demonstrates, that indicates, that reflects their values, to take things from the littlest people, from the ones that are most vulnerable, to deal with the deficit that's created by the very rich not paying their I don't know what fair share, they always say fair share. There's no such thing as fair share. But in the Bible, I think in the New Testament, I think in the Old Testament as well, it says, to those whom
much is given, much is expected.
Yeah, much is.
It's the New Testament.
Yeah. But I'm saying there's something equivalent in terms of values, and because no people give more charity than the Jewish people, because it's preached how important it is to help the poor, to help the least of your members. And the other day, there's a very right-wing extremist from, I think he's from, I'm not sure, maybe Louisiana. Kennedy is his last name, not related to the Kennedy family. And he was cross-examining a woman, a lady who's a member of the Biden administration. And he says, you mean you want to take money from the people who earned it, who worked for it, and give it to the people who need it? And she said, well, you're phrasing it in a way that I don't agree with. So she said, she didn't answer the question. He said, you know what that is? That's what Marx said, communism. You take from those that have and give to those that need. You reallocate the available resources. And once you call it communism or socialism, it's so pejorative that you have to. She said, "I'm glad I didn't say I'm in favor of it, because you would have called me a communist." But it's outrageous, because that's That's the only fair thing to do. And more than that, it's good for the people that have the money to give, because to the extent they give it to the poor spend it, and they always say, well, no poor person has ever created jobs. Only the rich create jobs. But the rich don't create jobs unless there's demand for what they're producing. Because when they're operating at 65% of capacity, even if interest rates are at zero, which they were in recent years, they don't borrow because they don't want to expand. They don't want to hire more people. Well, there's no reason for that. But even when interest rates were during the early stage of Reagan's administration, where U.S. Treasuries reached, AAA Treasuries paid 18% interest, and to borrow you had to pay very high interest at the banks. There was big demand, so the companies borrowed at 18% as long as they could make more than that.
But I mean, you talk about giving to the needy. Why is it wrong? For example, one of the things in the compromise was to add work requirements for the food stamps, the SNAP Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Why is that wrong?
There's nothing wrong with that, and I'm not against that. But they exaggerate. The right wing exaggerates, in my view, always what a big their welfare. They malign. Oh, these people are living great lives. They're just collecting. There is a lot of cheating, but it amounts to very small, and you don't forego the good to achieve the perfect. You help people that are downtrodden, and in the process, there'll be people that take advantage of it. That goes without saying. Just as the very rich take advantage, and they don't even need the extra money. It's human nature. So they make a big deal of that. That's more optics, that it looks good. We made people go to work so they could get, but it's not going to have a big impact.
What about reclaiming COVID funds that weren't spent, $28 billion?
Yeah, I have no problem with that. I mean, it's good to have what do they say? People should always have some savings in case of some disaster,
yeah.
or in case of a rainy day. So it would be good to have that for the economy to have it, for the government to have it. Should we run into some...
But isn't that a case where...
But I don't have a problem with that.
But isn't that a case where your example before about the credit card, how the national debt was like a credit card, has to be paid at the end of the month. Here, this $28 billion was not really spent. It was allocated, but not really spent the way other money in the budget was spent. So, that's, in that regard...
I'm not sure why that couldn't have been used anyway, to extend the date from June 6th to June. But it only... That amount of money, maybe the way we spend money,
yeah, it's petty cash.
It's about 3 days or 2 days, I don't know. So it's not significant. It's a big number to you and me and to most people, and it's a big number in general. But in terms of the magnitude of our government spending, it's...
But I think the Republicans do have a point when they argue...
They do have a point?
When they argue that that there's this is not money all spent, because there's $28 billion that wasn't spent, so it's not all spent. It was budgeted to be spent, so we changed the budget. So it's not like a credit card where the money is spent at the store, gone, you bought the service, you bought the item, and now you have to pay for it. This is, I budgeted to go on vacation for 10 days, and now, because of the situation in my family, I'm only going to go away for 5.
I'll share an insight with you, which you may be aware of, but the general public, most people are unaware of this, and that is if the military has is authorized to spend, as it is this year, 875 billion, and it comes, I think, at the year end of September for the budget, and they haven't spent it. They immediately run out and spend it, so the Congress and the Senate and the President doesn't think they can cut back.
They got too much.
Right. No, yeah. So there's an incentive to throw money away, to buy things they don't need, to make the defense companies.
That's what Kevin McCarthy would say.
Well, what would he say?
That's why you're able to cut some back after you've allocated
I agree.
it.
If he would say that, I would agree with him. But he says, this is one area you can look at, you can cut back. Why? We know that. The Congress knows that. It comes September, they may have $50 billion left. They'll spend that in the next few weeks. They'll give our contract. They'll do whatever they have to do to show that they needed that much money. And that's ridiculous.
How about student loans? Should we at least start collecting again? I mean, putting the forgiveness issue aside, because that's at the Supreme Court to be decided next month or over the summer. But do you start at least collecting? I mean,
it's great
people
for the
have 3
collection
years.
agency. There's a company that's publicly went up sharply yesterday.
Because we're going to start collecting again.
Because they get a lot of money, and they're even abusive. They beat up on people. They take away their car.
So, look, students had a 3-year hiatus, right, from 2020 to 2023. Is it time now to start?
Yeah, I don't have a great problem with that. But if you're one of the victims of that, it may be that it should.
There's always going to be someone who doesn't want to do that.
Look, you can't make everybody happy, so. But they always look to make the wealthiest happy, and the least happy less happy.
That's true. Let's see. How about you're not going to like this one, I know. Overhauling the National Environmental Policy Act to streamline permitting for energy projects. So that was something the Republicans wanted to be able to make
oil companies
and other easier to get permits. Pipelines. I mean, that's what Manchin. The people are not too happy with him. He got a pipeline through his state.
It's like Biden said, you have to swallow hard and accept a lot of crap that you're not happy with to get something done. He could have been stubborn and said, I'm not going to respond to blackmail. Somebody kidnaps your kid. You don't say, I'm not going to respond to that. It's saving your kid's life, so you do almost anything you can. So that was his view. He was unhappy with giving in to the Republicans. But the nation, the economy, is the president's kid. He has to make sure that he doesn't let the kidnappers totally destroy it. So,
well, both sides.
That's a good question.
Both sides. They both don't. Neither side wanted to be the ones.
No, but
that
Trump said, let it go on. The ones that are vigorously against deficits and increasing debt, even though it's been demonstrated that the Republicans are always against deficits and increasing the debt.
Until they increase the debt.
No, when they're always against that.
Until they do it.
When the Democrats are in power, they're against it. And when they're in power, they say they're doing it. Reagan said he's doing it, but he didn't do it. So it's important. Reagan was brilliant. He always was upbeat. and he made people feel that he was doing what he promised to do. That's great PR. You don't have to, if you're great PR, you're unlike Trump, who tends to be honest about things like, he tells his feelings. He tells his behavior. I could walk up to any woman and I think we should let it go into default. Whatever the consequences. He doesn't worry about the consequences.
Well, that's an interesting campaign thing for him. So does he campaign on that platform? I would have let the country default. I mean, that's not a popular platform. Usually his strategy is, it wouldn't have happened if I were president. We wouldn't have gone to war.
He would say that.
He would say it wouldn't have happened.
It wouldn't, yeah.
They would have.
He wouldn't give the details. He wouldn't delineate the details. He said it wouldn't have happened. I would have said we're going to let it go into default, and the Democrats would have folded.
Yeah,
we would have got whatever we wanted. Because I always got what As a matter of fact, the people that like his MAGA group, that are so loyal to him, a lot of them say, look, I don't, especially the Christians who have strong values about ethics, say, I can't say I admire his character or his behavior all the time, but he was great for the economy. He was good. And I'm always trying to figure out I loved it. During his years, America was great. Now, they don't know that he increased the debt more than any other president in the past, that he created a great deal of alienation between our historical allies. He almost wiped out NATO. Macron, the president of France today, said that NATO was brain dead until this recent series of events that Ukraine brought about, Russia brought about. It was a lot of them were saying we should stop NATO. We should just be, Europe should protect itself. Why do we have to get all these other nations involved? So he knows how to use as a matter of fact, they were just discussing that, what's his name's going to announce next Tuesday, Chris Christie, that he's going to challenge Trump.
Pence too. I think Pence is announcing on the 7th.
Yeah, but Pence doesn't make a difference because he doesn't do anything to attack Trump. In other words, to beat Trump, you got to.
So far, no one's doing that.
No, but Christie
He's the closest one. Yeah.
But they pointed out, I didn't remember this, that Chris Christie is the one that in the debate was the one that had the most violent attack, other than Trump, against another candidate who was up there and was one of the major opponents to Trump when he attacked the senator from Florida.
Rubio? Marco Rubio?
Rubio. And he wiped them up. And that's why Trump loved Christie at the beginning. But he didn't attack. He was a candidate for president, but he didn't attack because he was buddy with Trump.
Right.
They were both regional. He knew him from business in Jersey.
Yep. All right. So now that we solved this week's set of world problems, we can adjourn and focus on the next week's.
we didn't solve any problems, but we kicked the can
to next week.
So
we kicked it to next week.
We don't have to do.
Not 2 years next week.
Fortunately, you and I don't have to seek the votes of the people. So whatever we say they can hold against us. and maybe they should, but it's not like these other people in Washington that always have their ears up to figure out what's going to help them win.
Yep.
You know.
All right. Well, thank you for having me as a guest.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. You were a great guest, and didn't argue too much. So, unlike some of my other guests that beat up on me,
I'll have to do better next time.
You did great.
All right.
You added knowledge to my wisdom and sagacity to my listeners.
All right.
And to my listeners, I want to thank you again for joining me this week. Join me every week at 6:30, and if you didn't pick it up or your friends didn't pick it up, you can access it during the week or anytime on YouTube, on what are the other places?
Spotify,
a number of places. It's all over the place. And you may find that your wisdom on government, on civics, on things that may intrigue you if you get involved in learning about it. Have a great week. God bless you. I love you all. Bye.